What is going on? Adam from Reactive Terrain. Yes, I'm coming at you with a couple of top tricks and tips for your shock setup. And I'm going to run through some topics that we've touched on 1,000 times before, very briefly, to be honest with you. And then what I'm going to do is just show you my go-tos, what I do with the rigs that I build and my kind of general setup. I don't like flex too much, and I will explain in this video why. So let's look at some rigs, let's look at some shocks, and let's look at what goes wrong when you're kind of starting the hobby and you're setting your rig up for the first time. And we've all seen the pictures on social media. All right, so I'm at my humble dwelling with my worktop, which is just full of stuff. It was actually a lot worse than this. I had a load of 3D print orders everywhere, which I've just boxed up just to give me a bit of room, but I've got so many bits and bobs going on at the moment. But I'm going to be using most of my little setups that I've got, and I'm going to be showing you kind of where you might go wrong when you're doing your shock setup, and explain a little bit about why and what is happening when you kind of put your photograph on social media and say, why is it doing this? All right, so let's take a look at flex first of all. Okay, so I've got just here, this is an SCX24 without the chassis rails, because I've been using it, but this has got I think these are 43 millimeters, and if you have a little look, they're actually banded as well. I will quite often put a loom band or a small hair elastic band, and I'll show you what I've got, and I'll put a link in the description below to the pack that I use. Now these are super soft. The rears have got a little bit more spring, and I'll explain that as well, why I often have a little bit of spring. Really, when you're setting up your shocks, it's really down to kind of what you're planning on doing. If you're building a trail rig or a scaled hard body rig, then you're going to be setting it up very different to somebody that was doing a competition rig. So generally speaking, I'll have my front a little bit softer than the rear, and again, I think this is all down to personal preferences and experiences to kind of what you prefer to drive. I like the floating wheel effect, and what I mean by that is that when you're articulating over a rock, you haven't got a huge amount of flex, so that the rig kind of bows backwards and forwards. It kind of just sits there, and the front wheel just hover over the ground. I like that kind of simulated driving experience, and I kind of set my rigs up a lot like that. Now, 101 on shocks kind of performance, those that may not know this, this could be just common practice or common sense, I don't know, but when the shock is completely vertical, it's working at 100%. When you kind of lay it down, so it's now running horizontal, it's doing 0. So if you're running the shock kind of there, it's theoretically acting as another link. It's not really doing a busting lot. I mean, you know, it's set up, and I've got no movement at all really on that spring. So it obviously does do something. There is like a small percentage, but it's basically doing nothing. So obviously when you're kind of halfway in the middle, it's doing 50%. And I kind of set all my shocks at the kind of 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock position. So the front shocks are set at 10 o'clock. So 12 o'clock being upright, 11, 10. And that is where I will set my shocks. That is my kind of go-to on most of my rigs, at the front at a 10 o'clock position. On the rear, I will set at 2 o'clock. So again, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. And that's where I will kind of set all my shocks up. Now, when you're going flex, a lot of people will use double barrel shocks. Do I have anything with double barrels? Yes, I think this is running double barrels. Yeah, this is running double barrels. So this will give you a lot of flex. And the thing I don't like about the double barrels is that if you are running a hard body on it and a lot of weight up top, when you get it at a vertical position, this won't do it because it's actually a really light body, and I've also got them banned. it will just open up and it'll just release. So it will simply just offload like this, and then all that weight shifts and the center of gravity shifts, and before you know it, you're barrel rolling. As you can see, mine are kind of almost wanting to pull themselves back up. That's because I have got double barrels. I've got super soft springs which are barely doing anything because I can kind of move them up and down. You know, they're not even the full length of the actual shock fully extended. They're just there to take a bit of the buff. But I've also got them banded as well, which is kind of crucial for double barrels, because, you know, that's a lot of offload. You know, that as you come off and it just suddenly offloading and all that weight shifting, it's going to cause you nothing but issues. Now, obviously, if you've got a Lennox body on top, you're going to get a lot less weight. This is a roll cage system body, so this is quite lightweight. However, if you were to run something like this, that is not so light. So if you imagine all that offload as you come up, and it's just gonna fold the whole thing back. Now on this, I'm actually running standard shocks, and again they're kind of running in the 10 and 2 position, and they kind of, you know, you can see they offload, but they don't offload a lot. And that means that maybe, you know, you're kind of limited to a bit of flex, but really I think that's kind of two or three tires, maybe 2 or 3 tires, really comfortably. And that's my kind of go-to. Anything much more than that, you're really going to start having a lot of, well, center of gravity shifting, and you kind of want the rig as stable as possible, especially when you're doing like crazy inclines and stuff like that. Or you've got to band them up, which, well, you may as well put small shocks on it. But what I do with this one is I've got quite heavy front end on this. The wheels have got lead in them and a brass weight because of the big body I was running on it. And what this enabled it to do was just keep everything nice and front weighted, so that when it was kind of coming up off the rocks and doing climbs, it was nice and stable. And also it's relatively stable on the incline, on kind of hill climbs, because yes, you're going to have a small amount of shock movement and that's it. So, you know, as long as you've got your weight, that's all I've got. So it's not having this massive amount of shifting backwards and forwards on the side hill as well. So really, yeah, look, it's a big bowl of jelly, but surprisingly stable. I got a couple of shorts and videos of this thing just doing some cool lines. Surprisingly very, very able. And I like it. You know, it moves really fluidly, it wobbles around, and I do quite like the way this drives. Super scaled, super fun. But that is kind of still using that relatively small travel, which is where I like to put all my rigs, really. Let's have another look at something else. So this is another big rig, and we've recently got this one and we kind of drove it around, and this has really nice oil shocks on it, and they look like they're kind of big bore 43 millimeters. I haven't actually measured them, but I believe they are. They look like it. So, and they really do. They are so soft and lovely and fluid. The motion is great. There's no binding to it. It's a really, really nice setup. Now, I'm sure they all vary slightly throughout the manufacturers, because this is manufactured. I haven't actually done anything to this. But again, it's got very little flex, but it's super capable. And again, once you know you kind of got that body up past a point, you know, it's going to take over and it's going to roll because it's all top heavy. So what you don't want is, you know, too much offloading, sudden kind of jolking offload, and it just throw everything off and away it goes. With these oil shocks, it's a little slower movement, so it does just move that tad slower. Oh, yeah, not the camera. But it works really well. And again, it's a big rig. It's probably got about 2 or 3 tire width on it. I've got some big, these are quite big, these are 20 mils, so there's 1, 2, yeah, so 2 tire, maybe 2.5. I suppose it would be 3 tires for a standard, because these are like 20 mil wide, so most tires aren't that wide. So, you know, that's a really comfortable thing to do. Now let's you know, if we go back to this flex monster machinery, you know, we see the pictures on the internet and they kind of look a little like this, you know, and people are going, why is it looking like this? What is it doing? And it really is, it's just down to your positioning of your shocks. And that's really all it is. You'll put it on the rail, or you might even put it on the existing shock mounts. And the moment you lift it up, all that double barrel, the big 60 mils that you can get, what, you know, the size you get, they're just going to drop, and your axles are going to drop, and it's just going to do this weird kind of look like this. And the way you're going to rectify that is to by either mounting these higher, so you've still got flex, but they're not dropping so much, or you're going to need to bring them back to even maybe a 3 o'clock position, you know, on your chassis rail, or create a little plate for them to sit on, so that you don't get that huge amount of drop straight away. And the other thing you're going to want to do is put a band on them, because that will also stop them from completely offloading. So you'll still have the flex, and they will offload. You will get the flex because these rigs are relatively, you know, heavy in places, and they will flex that shock completely out, but the band is there just to keep it pulled in, so that when you're kind of on an incline or on a decline, you're not getting that sudden dropout. And that's kind of what you're trying to avoid. So you can actually pick these up on Amazon, super cheap, and you get a couple of different types. So you will get something that's called a loom band, and that is what children use to create rubber band bracelets. They work quite well, but I found them not to be that springy. Some of them can be a little flat, which is fine if that's kind of what you're after. But I actually do use black elasticated hairbands, and these are for braids, basically. It's for braiding. So yeah, this is what I use. They got a bit of spring in them, but not, you know, not where they're kind of snapping and kind of flicking your fingers. They've just got enough amount of spring to them. They don't last a long time. They will kind of wear and corrode within a few weeks, and then you're going to need to put a few more on, hence why I have a big pile of them. All right, so let's talk about some binding issues that you may come across. And really this is actually down to the shock and your setup. And sometimes you can have a setup and the shocks won't bind, and other times you can have a setup and they do bind, you know. So at the moment this rig here is really nice and loosey goosey. These are little Endura oil shocks. I've got no springs on the rear. I've actually got them turned upside down, and I've also got a band on them as well. So what you can do is Endura are pretty good. They will normally kind of come with them. You can see on this one I've actually got little spacers. Enduras do a really nice kit that comes with a load of selection of shock spacers, and basically what this enables you to do is put a bit of spacing out on the shocks to get them to the point where they're nice and smooth, because some of them, you know, do take a little bit of work to get nice and fluid. This one's really nice. It's nice and set up. It's super fluid. And actually I've actually got no spacers on the front. Didn't need them, but I did put a couple of spacers on the rear. For whatever reason, needed it because they was just slightly binding. So I took that out. Now I've got no shocks, sorry, I've got no bands on the front of this this Bulldog chassis. This is because I want the lift of the front end. I want it to kind of pull the skid down up and pull the axle down to give it a little bit more breakover. But that because they're oil, they don't offload really kind of fast, and I've also still got soft springs on the front. So there you go. It's a very different type of setup. So there's no bands on the front. It's oil shocks with really soft springs. I've got no springs on the rear with hairbands, and they're upside down as well. So it gives you some idea of the kind of options you want to be looking at to get a nice smooth travel and good transfer. All right, let's have another look at another rig. So going back to the classic flex and using just your shocks alone to try and create crazy flex is actually only half of the story. Really what you want to be looking at is a good combination between link length and shocks, not just relying on your shocks to give you the flex. And really, because you know this only has 40 mil big bores on it, or 43 mils, I can't remember what they are now actually. We're going to say 40. They could be 43 big bores from Endura. And this has got, you know, this has got a lot. You know, it's almost my fist. So, and I don't have double barrels on it. I haven't got 63mm shocks on it. I've got 40mm big bores on it. And again, they are sprung and hairbanded. This has got, I think I put spacers on these as well, because I did find it was just binding a smidge on the rear. So just widened them out a little bit on this rear. So you can see, just go to the camera, kind of see how they're just slightly still tapering in, but not as much as they were initially. And that is, you know, it's lovely and fluid on the rear. And really this is a combination of link setups as well. So if you were going to want something super crazy flexy, then my advice would to put, you know, say C10 rear links on the front and Gladiator links on the rear. It would give you a crazy long rig, but your flex would be super wide. You know, you'd have a lot of flex because it's all down to kind of movement on your links and kind of physics on the sticks, really. Let's have a little look at, let's use a couple of rails for demonstration. So for demonstration purposes, what we got here is, if we're looking at the top of these as your links, and we're going to go super short like a deadbolt. So what you've got here is this type of movement. Okay, so you've got this type of movement, and you know, you're going to gain maybe 10, 15, 20 mil flex on the axle backwards and forwards. You know, you've got small arms with a 40mm movement, or even a 60mm movement, because they're going to have their limit. You know, they're only going to be able to go so far. Whereas if you swapped them out and you put longer links on it, that same movement is going to travel over more of a distance. And so it's actually going to give you a wider opening at the end of the link. So you're going to get more flex. So to create more flex isn't just in the shock. You could use smaller shocks, but longer links to create a more stable vehicle regarding the flex setup. That being said, my favorite go-to, which I don't actually have a rig set up, but I'm going to show you what I do with them, is actually the smallest shocks on the market. And I use them for a lot of my hard body builds because they give you a really nice simulated driving experience. They don't have crazy offload. They don't have crazy amount of flex. So if you've got a lot of weight on top and you've got a lot of accessories, you're not going to be shifting that center of gravity crazy when you're trying to crawl. So it's kind of keeping everything buttoned down really tight to the ground as low as you can get it all the time with movement. Now, it does have a few limitations, but you can kind of overcome them with tire sizes. If you know the channel, you know I don't like big tires really, but I do seem to have a lot of rigs with big tires on at the moment. But I'm going to show you what they are and what I do to make them perform absolutely beautiful. All right, so here they are. I've actually got a fresh pack ready for a build as well. But I've already got a set up in the drawer ready for a build. Now these are my absolute go-to, and they're tiny. You know, look, they're so small. I think they're like 32 mils or 30, something like that. They are dinky. Really small. I think fully extended they are a smidge smaller than those. So yeah, they are. Let's compare them against some stocks. Are they the same? Oh look, there you go. So they are the same as stocks, stock shocks, but these hold a little bit of a secret. So this is my rear one. Now when you take these apart, inside is a internal spring, and as you can tell by mine, it is half the size of what it used to be. All right, so in fact that's quite rusty, and I probably could do with some oil in there. So that is half the size. So I softened it up by removing half of the spring, because they do come super bouncy, and this just gives enough pressure just to stop it from bottoming out. Not too much bounce so it puts the vehicle off balance, just enough to really kind of offer a bit of buffering. But most of the time with the weight, it will sit fully compressed and just travel when needed, when it's actually over rocks. Now the front is a very different setup, and this actually pulls itself constantly inwards, and the way you do that is by undoing the nut, which again is super rusty. So you come to reactive terrain, things get wet. And again, I cut the spring in half, and I remove this, and I put the spring between the collet and the end of this nylon washer. And what this is now constantly doing is pulling the front technically down. Yeah, so it's pulling all the rig down all the time. So the moment it starts trying to offload on a hill climb, it wants to bounce back down. And that, I have to say, is probably one of my favorite setups. Forget the flex, forget all the craziness. These two little shocks is an absolute mighty setup when building a nice scaled or hard body rig, combined with some good tires, you know, maybe 56s to maybe 60s at most for me. And yeah, happy all day long. You get that lovely floating wheel effect when you're kind of traveling over the terrain, and it really does give you a great driving rig. All right, so there you go. Couple of cool setups that, you know, give them a go, give them a try, and once you've given it a try, let me know in the comments below of how they got on. Well, let's just touch base on one more topic, and it's the favorite topic: lube. Yeah, no one likes a dry shaft, so you need to pick the right lube for the job. And these are my two go-tos, and probably not what you're expecting maybe. I don't use any kind of fancy RC oil or anything like that. I literally use these two, and this one is for your clippers that do your hair, your beard trimmer, your hair clippers, anything like that. So it's designed for high movement, and it's designed basically to put between the two blades for constant friction. So it's a really good oil. It is super thin, but you don't need a lot of it. And actually what I generally do is I like to use it on the kind of double barrels, on the outside of the double barrels, and I will just kind of take them apart, and I'll dribble a bit inside this barrel here, which will then lube up the second barrel. and it will hang around for, you know, a fair few months before it starts getting dry again, depending on what you're doing. Obviously, if you're in a lot of water like we do, does repel the water, which is great, but obviously it will dry up, and it's just general maintenance, but that really does help. The other stuff you can use is the 3-in-1, and this is basically for metal chains, nuts, screws, bolts, anything like that really, and it's basically designed to not only keep it lubricated but actually stop any seizing or any rust buildup. So, you know, if you're in the water and stuff like that, you can kind of hit your shocks with a spray of this, maybe just before a run or anything like that. Kind of just spray your bars, spray your shaft, spray your springs, and it will just keep it nice and free. And again, you know, these two products are cheap as anything, and you get a lot. You know, I've had this for years, you know, to the point where I, you know, even used it for 1/10 stuff, and this is, well, it's practically full, so you don't use a busting lot of it. But these are the two products I kind of use. I also use this when I'm stripping down my rigs, which I do kind of every quarterly, kind of tear everything apart, get rid of all the bearings, and I put all the bearings in a soak, and basically go to town just to keep all the rust and dirt away from everything. So yeah, I do like a good strip down and a good lube up. But there you go, that's what I use. This does work quite well internally as well. You might get a little seepage through because it is quite runny, but honestly, I've used it in a number of my shocks now, and I've had no complaints with it at all. It's actually really, really good, and does help for a good smooth action. So there you go, just a few of my personal opinions and personal setups. Maybe it's something you haven't tried, or maybe you've come across a bit of a problem. You're like, oh, what's the best way of dealing with that? Shims are definitely your best friend when kind of setting up your shocks. So I put a link in the description regarding Endura's selection. They do a really good selection, and I definitely recommend having them in your arsenal of tools. And yeah, good old-fashioned hair bands for braiding and stuff like that. With those little tiny shocks that I showed you that I kind of use on a lot of my scale builds, you can actually get them in a 1/18 as well, if you wanted them just a smidge bigger. Again, you can do the same trick. You can kind of reverse spring them, but they do come up a lot bigger. So that's a 1/18 version, and these things are small, and you know, there's the two size comparisons. You can tell by the barrel that they're a lot bigger. So you can get these a lot bigger. You will need to shim them out just a smidge, but they do look great on scale builds, and they work super well. Yeah, give it a go. Let me know in the comments which one you like. Let me know what you're doing. Maybe you're a 63mm guy. Maybe you're a 43mm guy. Maybe you're a double barrel guy. Maybe you're a double barreled lady. Who knows? Just let me know what's your go-to. I'd love to see kind of, yeah, what everyone's using. I bet there's a lot of stock shock users. I could see there being a lot of stock shock users. I've got a couple of rigs with stock shocks still, and they just work. Right. I suppose better tidy up. All right, guys, keep crawling, keep safe, and I'll see you next time.